Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3, testing. 1 minute to start. Okay, good evening, everybody. It's lovely to see so many of you here tonight. Hopefully you can see and hear me. I am Mr. Sizer. I'm the designated safeguarding lead in the school, and my colleague, my designated safeguarding lead colleague, is Miss Browning, who I'm hopeful I'm going to be able to put on the screen in just a moment. There we go, Miss Browning.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us.
Okay, so what we're going to talk about today is, let's see if we can get, here we go. So today's topic is, we're going to talk about, there we go. Today's topic is, we're going to talk predominantly about social media, gaming and mental health. So the key focuses of the next half an hour or so, we'll be as quick as we can because we know it's 6 o'clock in the evening, everyone's having tea, etc. But the four main focuses of today are to talk about how young people use technology, and many of you will know much about this already, but you'd be surprised how much of it comes as quite a shock. Secondly, how social media can affect and gaming can affect mental health. And then thirdly, the curriculum. So what do we do at the Willink School which supports young people with their mental health and with social media and helping students understand to educate them. And finally, some practical strategies at the end for parents to help support their young person, their children, to safely learn about social media, gaming and promote positive mental health. Now, what we are going to talk about, first of all, I'm going to hand over to Miss Browning. All over to you, Miss Browning.
Thank you. We thought, first of all, it might be good to put this into context. We have emerged from we are emerging from a pandemic and 2 lockdowns. And of course, during the course of those lockdowns, we all relied heavily upon technology. And in fact, the way that in which we work, the fact that we're able to do this with you this evening in this format is as a result of lockdown. And the way that young people consumed literacy and consumed digital technology did change. So you can see here that actually there's some interesting statistics. This information is based on a survey by Ofcom and focuses specifically on 5 to 15-year-olds, with the evidence ranging that 5 to 15-year-olds, 70% of them have or had access to a tablet during lockdown. That 69% had access to a large screen, 65% to mobile phones, 41% to games consoles, 37 to smart TVs, and I suspect that that has increased since then with the reliance on live streaming such as Netflix, and then 28, a reduced number, to a desktop, which is interesting because desktops tend to be in an office or in a family room that others in the family do access. And then we've got some other interesting information about the exposure that young people have to technology and at different age ranges. So there is evidence for 5 to 8-year-olds, for example, but if you look at the difference between 8 to 11-year-olds, which of course is that transition between primary to secondary, again, some more information, but 76% of those students are using a tablet, 72% are using a laptop, 62% are regularly using a smartphone, 58% watch live broadcasts on TV, and 91% watch on-demand TV, because actually what we have become used to, particularly during lockdown, is live streaming and the fact that we want to be able to consume things at our own time, a choice of our time, which means that lots of young people have been binge watching, not just young people, adults as well, binge watching series to occupy their time. But then if you move over to the other side of the screen, we have 12 to 15-year-olds where that consumption significantly increases, and that is the point at which young people are at secondary school and are expanding their networks. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're expanding the number of friends that they have, but they are increasing their networks to 80% of students using a smartphone, 80% using a laptop, 61% watching live broadcasts, 92% watching video on demand. So their consumption significantly increases. And therefore, we need to have more conversations about how they use that and how they use it safely. And part of the reason that you're here this evening is because you're interested in how your child uses technology and how you can support them to use technology best. We've got further information if we move on to the next slide. We also know that during lockdown, the use of video sharing platforms, or VSPs as the cool kids now call it, the examples of VSPs include YouTube, TikTok in particular, Snapchat and Instagram, that far more students and young people are using video sharing platforms than they ever did before. So 97% of 5 to 15-year-olds saying that they used them during the pandemic, that in fact it became part of their daily routine because they weren't necessarily able to go out for a walk, they weren't going running, they weren't going to clubs, so that became their alternative method of connecting with the world. Further, 58% of children use YouTube daily. And we've got some examples of the kinds of things they were watching on YouTube. And on average, students or young people spent 2.5 hours on YouTube each day during the pandemic and post-pandemic. So 2.5 hours, imagine how much hoovering, tidying, ironing, cooking they could be doing for you at home instead of watching YouTube. And 50% of 15-year-olds also said that they used TikTok to view content, but 33% posted content on TikTok, which was, as I said, an example of a video sharing platform. So not only were they consuming, they're actively contributing, and that means that they're maybe actively contributing from their bedroom, which means in the background they may have some personal information, they may be sharing from their living room, their garden, but the danger with that is that TikTok videos can be very short, very sudden, and you may not know that they've been doing that. And if we then move on,
Miss Browning, I think it's probably fair to say as well that if 33% of that 5 to 15-year-olds that are on the screen, I mean, obviously 5, 6, 7, 8, 9-year-olds not using Snapchat, Instagram and Facebook anywhere near as much. But once you get into the secondary age group, the age group of the children at the Willink, and other secondary age students, it's much, much higher. And if 50% are saying that they use TikTok, then the actual number will be much higher. And Snapchat, Instagram, less so Facebook. Facebook's much more for older people, but and so therefore young people tend not to use it so much. But certainly Snapchat, Instagram are used far more than 33%, far more. Sorry, Miss.
Of course, this information all comes from surveys completed by Ofcom, but of course it does only include the people who have admitted that they're doing these things. So the percentage may be much higher. And this graph shows us the kind of things that students are spending their time looking at on video sharing platforms on their VSPs, and it ranges from funny videos to jokes to music videos to pranks, to sports, to adverts, but you can see there's a range of things that they're looking for. So gone are the days where young people are going to to speak to adults to get their guidance, looking at newspapers, searching through magazines. Much of what they are informed by, many of their views are informed by these TikTok videos, Instagram videos, etc. And of course, one of the questions that we ask students is about, are these reliable? Where do they get their information from? Who are these people? And we'll talk about that a little bit later. We've got some stats on 5 to 7 year olds, and again, I know we're talking to you as parents of secondary children, but actually the reason we're including information about younger children is that this starts at a much earlier age than what we expect and what we've been used to. 39% of 5 to 7 year olds, primary school students, have admitted that they have posted on video sharing platforms such as TikTok, whereas 75%, 3/4 of 12 to 15 year olds have posted. That's a huge number. I have to confess that I'm a dinosaur. I don't think I would know how to post on TikTok. So perhaps one of my my pieces of homework after this is to learn how to do it so that I can better have conversations with young people about how they're using social media. And one of the trends, and this is true when we talk to our students, is the amount of time that students can spend, or young people can spend, without really knowing and noticing that they've spent the time on their phone. So as this young person here, William, says, you can go on it for 5 minutes and then you end up scrolling and scrolling and scrolling for hours. It becomes addictive, and you don't really know what it's about. So it's a repetitive addictive stage of just watching videos that are not particularly of interest. They've not been deliberately sought, but they maintain that cycle of scrolling. So if they're spending 2.5 hours on video sharing platforms, then that's 2.5 hours that they're not completing homework, they're not reading, they're not interacting with their family, they're not going out for walks with the dog, they've maybe stopped going to football clubs, and that's why we're highlighting the time that young people spend on these video sharing platforms.
I think it's probably fair to say, and I'm sure most of you probably understand that comment from William, that he may be 16, but I suspect we've all been in that position where we think we're looking at our phone for two or 3 minutes, and actually once you get sucked into it, you're spending a great deal more time on it. So they're the statistics, they're the things that we know. These are borderline facts, as much as people are honest about things, but we do know that these companies are making a huge amount of money from us. So therefore, millions and millions and billions of people around the world are doing this. Our young people in West Berkshire are no different to anybody else. But what we want to think about is that as well as that this addiction to mobile phones and devices is just that, in many cases, is an addiction. And we need to think about that. So if you think about yourself as well. I mean, I think about this in the first 5 minutes after you've woken up, how many of us actually use our phones? Because 74% of young people admit to it. Apple and other phones have data that shows how many times you pick it up and what times you pick it up. Sometimes you can look at your screen usage data, and it will be quite shocking. Rarely, 58% of young people admit they don't go 1 hour without checking their phone. 26% say they respond to messages they receive during the night. We'll talk about that a little while shortly. 68% feel their work is suffering because of them. If you've got any young people who are in year 11 at the moment, and indeed year 13, and they should be revising and etc. And phones can be really useful for that sort of thing, but actually they can also be a huge distraction. 56% admit that they're overusing their phones. 20% nationally of teenagers would say they would rather go without shoes for a week than without their mobile phones. And 33% spend more time socializing online on their phones or on other devices than they do face to face, which is definitely something at the Willing that we are very, very concerned about. And one of the key reasons why we say no phones during your school time. So that's the data, that's the information. We need to think now about what the impact of this is. What's the impact of all of this information, all of this use of devices and things on young people? Now, before we move on, we're going to hopefully play a video in just a moment. But before we do that, I keep my fingers crossed that it actually works. But before we do that, What I'd like to say is that you will notice there's a question and answer session, a question thing on this live event. And if you'd like to ask a question, you can type that in there, and Miss Browning and myself will do our absolute best to answer them for you during the course of the event. And one of us will be presenting, one of us will be looking at the live questions. So feel free to post something up and we'll be able to answer you about that. So what is the impact? So I'm going to hopefully play you this video. It doesn't last very long, but hopefully you can hear it.
Of the 7 billion people on Earth, roughly 6 billion own a cell phone, which is pretty shocking given that only 4.5 billion have access to a working toilet. So how are these popular gadgets changing your body and brain? If you're looking down at your phone right now, your spine angle is equivalent to that of an 8-year-old child sitting on your neck, which is fairly significant considering people spend an average of 4.7 hours a day looking at their phone. This, combined with the length of time spent in front of computers, has led to an increase in the prevalence of myopia or nearsightedness in North America. In the 1970s, about 1/4 of the population had myopia, where today nearly half do. And in some parts of Asia, 80 to 90% of the population is now nearsighted. And it can be hard to put your phone down. Take, for example, the game Candy Crush. As you play the game, you achieve small goals, causing your brain to be rewarded with little bursts of dopamine. And eventually you're rewarded in the game with new content. This novelty also gives little bursts of dopamine and together create what is known as a compulsion loop, which just happens to be the same loop responsible for the behaviors associated with nicotine or cocaine. Our brains are hardwired to make us novelty seeking, and this is why apps on our phones are designed to constantly provide us with new content, making them hard to put down. As a result, 93% of young people aged 18 to 29 report using their smartphone as a tool to avoid boredom, as opposed to other activities like reading a book or engaging with people around them. This has created a new term, nomophobia, the fear or anxiety of being without your phone. We also see a change in brain patterns. Alpha rhythms are commonly associated with wakeful relaxation, like when your mind wanders off, whereas gamma waves are associated with conscious attentiveness. And experiments have shown that when a cell phone is transmitting, say during a phone call, the power of these alpha waves is significantly boosted, meaning phone transmissions can literally change the way your brain functions. Your smartphone can also disrupt your sleep. The screen emits a blue light which has been shown to alter our circadian rhythms, diminishing the time spent in deep sleep, which is linked to the development of diabetes, cancer, and obesity. Studies have shown that people who read on their smartphone at night have a harder time falling asleep and produce less melatonin, a hormone responsible for the regulation of sleep-wake cycles. Harvard Medical School advises the last 2 to 3 hours before bed be technology-free, so pick up a book before bed instead. Of course, smartphones of this.
So, very quick rattle through that, and there's one or two things we'd like to focus on particularly. The idea that this changes brain patterns, use of mobile phones, use of devices changes brain patterns, and we're talking about addiction. It referenced two things there: similar addiction patterns to the use of cigarettes, similar addiction patterns to use of cocaine. That affects the brain in the same way. So therefore, when young people, or anybody for that matter, but young people particularly, struggle to put their phones away, there is a genuine possibility they're addicted to that. So we need to think about how we handle that. Well, what the last thing in that video we would like to think about is sleep hygiene. So we're going to just focus for a moment on that. Sleep. So you probably know all this. Most teenagers need 8 to 10 hours sleep a day. 8 hours, I suppose, is normal for adults as best as possible, and the earlier the better. So not 8 hours, you might say midnight to 8 o'clock, but actually it's better to have it earlier than that. And as that video showed, if you're using your devices, and the blue light that's emitted from there can negatively affect the quality and quantity of sleep. Miss Browning and I and our colleagues here at school who work pastorally with students have found an increasing problem of young people struggling to sleep. And often that's put down to not using, using devices in the evening, and it can impact on the ability to learn. It can increases the risk of anxiety considerably. You struggle to regulate your emotions because you're tired and not sleeping as well as you should. So a handful of things you can do. First of all, something active. And the more that you can be active during the day, even if it's a brisk walk, taking the dog out in the evening, or going for a run or something like that, if you're not playing, not playing at a sports club or something like that, will help you sleep. Secondly, set an alarm to go to bed. Remove tablets. We'll come on to some family rules a little bit later on. Encourage reading before you go to bed. Have phones out of bedrooms. Have devices out of bedrooms. This is, for some people, this would be absolutely revolutionary. But genuinely, your bedroom is somewhere where you sleep. Therefore, it shouldn't be somewhere where you play games. It shouldn't be somewhere where you're watching video on demand and things like that. Instead, use it for somewhere where you sleep, where you read, things that will help you relax. You can think about, breathing activities that will help with your mindfulness. And I, for one, have to stop drinking caffeinated drinks around about 7 o'clock, have my last cup of tea. And anybody who knows me would know this is absolutely almost unthinkable. The last cup of tea I have in the day is about 7 o'clock at night. So it helps me then get to sleep about 4 hours later. So sleep hygiene, very, very important. We talked briefly about gaming as well. So gaming is part of this too. I have many conversations with students who talk about having their Xbox or their PlayStation or whatever in their bedroom, and therefore there's no control over it. You can see from the statistics up there that 86% of 12 to 15-year-olds are regular gamers. And the quote at the bottom from Nathan, who's age 14, most of the day on the weekend is on the Xbox, because most of my friends are online at the weekend and we play together a lot, probably like 10 hours. Just imagine doing something for 10 hours a day. That's a lot. I mean, if you did anything for 10 hours a day, that would be, you'd think it would be boring. You'd think you'd get fed up with it. You'd think you'd want to do something else the next day. And yet that's not what happens. And we think gaming is not a bad thing. The trouble is we're going to sit here and we're going to say, well, gaming, what a terrible thing. We really shouldn't do it. But actually, during lockdown, numbers went up considerably, as we'll see a bit later. But it was a good thing. I've got teenage children. My daughter doesn't game at all, but my son does. And actually, during the 2 lockdowns over the last couple of years, his PlayStation games of FIFA and Fortnite and things like that have really allowed him to keep socializing with other people, with his friends, because he could play with them, and they used to chat with each other. So they were keeping up to date with each other every day, basically. But we did limit the time that he was allowed, and we sort of made an agreement with his friends, with parents of his friends, that they were only allowed on they would start at a certain time. I'll be fair, we haven't managed to stick to that brilliantly, and it creeps in. All right, it doesn't always, best laid plans often go to waste, but it is important to have some sort of plans in place. However, some of these figures are interesting. 25% of the people who play games play against or with people they don't know, and therefore they're chatting to those people who they don't know. And the question you've always got to ask is, when you talk to somebody online and you don't know who they are they really who they say they are? I'm sure in most cases they are, but actually here at the school we work with young people who have been taken in by other people who are not who they claim to be. So we do need to be careful about that. Social media.
If we can just go back to that slide, there's an interesting point of comparison between the different age brackets. So on the left-hand side, we've got young people between the age of 5 to 15, where 25% have said that they played against people who they didn't know in the real world. But when you look at the 8 to 15-year-olds, the older bracket that we're considering more, 67% chat to people who they've never met outside the gaming world. They've never met them in the real world. And whilst we're right that can increase their confidence and it can increase their network and increase their cultural awareness if they're having deep and meaningful conversations, it also means that it's increasing their exposure to people who they do not know, and they don't know their backgrounds, and equally as parents or carers, we don't know. And I suppose one of the questions would be, why is there such a significant difference? Well, on the left-hand side, it does cover the full age range of 5 to 15-year-olds. But we assume then that 5 to at the younger end of the spectrum, that there's maybe a little bit more parental control or questions about who they're gaming with, when they're gaming, where they're gaming. Because as young people get older, we do naturally become more flexible and assume that they are going to follow the rules and guidance and boundaries that we've given them. So I think that age difference is quite significant. So then we think about social media. Sorry, Mr. Sizer, I'm just going to continue with this one. Social media, as Mr. Sizer said, we are going to interrupt each other, but we think about gaming and social media almost on similar levels, not as two discrete aspects, because there are so many overlapping features. But if we think about social media in particular, the minimum age requirement for most social media platforms is 13 years old. And that age requirement is set by the providers. It's not enshrined by law, but it is a guidance. So we would expect those people who are using social media to be above 13. That would be the terms and conditions when we sign up to it. But you can see, and that this is again taken from Ofcom, so we don't know whether this is honest, but these are the people who are willing to admit. We've got 33% of 5-year-olds admitting to using social media. And then that dips a little bit, 6 to 7, but then increases so significantly that by the time they are at secondary school, at least at 12 years old, 74% of young people are using social media. So therefore, we have to assume networking with people who they've never met in the real world, moving up to 86, then to 91%, and by the age of 15, 95% of young people are using social media. And if we correlate that with the number, what we know about the number of hours that they are said to spend on social media and how easily that can happen, it becomes much more a prevalent feature of their life. And I'm sure that there are many parents watching now saying, oh, life would be so much easier if we just didn't have phones and we just didn't have social media. And I know that there are many staff who would also say the same thing. But the reality is they do exist. Young people will use them as children, and they will use them as adults. So it's our job to make sure that we educate them, to make sure that they're using them safely and appropriately. And so we've got some information here that shows you what their experience is like. Look at these numbers. 55% of 12 to 15-year-olds, so if you think about from years 7 through to 8, 9, have had a negative online experience, so more than half. 30% of those have been contacted by a stranger who wanted to be their friend. I'm actually surprised that that number is so low, given what we've said about consumption. 75% or 3/4 of 12 to 15-year-olds know how to block messages on social media. I'm disappointed that that isn't higher, because we spend a lot of time in school through the tutor programme, the PSHE curriculum, the computing curriculum, in showing young people how to do that. But it is an indication that it's a message that we need to reinforce, and not just from school, but from all other angles. 55% of young people between the age of 12 and 15 have blocked somebody who they didn't want to hear from. Now, that may be somebody who they've never met before, but it's also possible that they've blocked somebody who they do know, who they may have been friends with at some point, or may still consider a friend, but not particularly at that moment, because when somebody is blocked, they can also be unblocked. 20%, 1/5, of 12 to 15-year-olds have accidentally spent money online. Now, you may be wondering, how can they possibly accidentally spend money online? This is where there's the overlap with social media and gaming. If your child is buying what we call in-game purchases on a game, where that means that they can progress to a next level or buy weapons to help them in their quest, then you may have had to provide your debit card details to purchase that one-off online purchase. But what we don't always notice is that the card details are stored. So we have had examples of students in this school and beyond where their parents suddenly find that £800 has been debited from their credit card because their child has been saying, yes, I want to buy, yes, I want to buy, yes, I want to buy, without really having the concept of money and understanding that it is coming from an account somewhere. So 1 in 5 students have accidentally done that. And then 20% have seen something of a sexual nature that made them feel uncomfortable. And that could be a message, a photograph, a cartoon, but 1 in 5 of a sexual nature that made them feel uncomfortable. And that doesn't mean that they asked for it. Doesn't mean that. I'm
going to interrupt for a second.
Yeah.
Sorry, Ms. Browning. I mean, there's a couple of things there that I think are worthy of lingering on. One of which is the credit card thing. It's really very important that you keep an eye on that and regularly check. So you can set up on PlayStations and Xboxes and things like that. You can set up blocks so that if they do buy something, if children do buy something, you get a message first to say that actually they've asked to buy this in-app purchase, and you should do that so that you at least know, because it's not a bad thing to spend money on something that is good and fun. Is not a bad thing, but equally it's not necessarily something you should criticize your child for, because we watched that video and we know that actually purchasing these things and playing these games gives young people an absolute high, and it makes them aroused and it makes them addicted and it affects their brain. So therefore, in some ways, they can become slightly addicted. So it's very important that we keep aware of that. The other thing is this 20% of 12 to 15-year-olds have seen something of a sexual nature which made them uncomfortable. I'll be quite honest with you, I would have said that figure would be much higher than that. In our experience, that would be a very low estimate, and we'll come on to sexting and things like that a bit later on, but I would say that that would be a much higher figure. Certainly for the students at the Willing, that would be a much higher figure than 20%. Maybe they don't like to admit that it's made them feel uncomfortable. Maybe it would make us feel uncomfortable, and it probably does make them feel uncomfortable, but I think that's an interestingly low figure. Miss Browning.
So recently, all students had an assembly, and much of what we are talking about now, we do cover in assemblies, including the video that we showed you earlier. That's something that we have included in assemblies. But a recent assembly did cover the topic of hate crime. On the left-hand side of the screen, you can see the protected characteristics of people who would be targeted, or groups of people who would be victims of hate crime. That would be based on disability, ethnicity, religion or beliefs, gender identity, and sexual orientation. They are the 5 characteristics legally recognised as protected characteristics under the umbrella of hate crime by the government and police. At the bottom of the slide, we have in purple there misogyny, and you know that at the Willink School we're all about the purple pen of progress, and we have spoken to students about this concept of misogyny and prejudice based on attitudes towards women, which has been ingrained in society and culture, and the fact that at the moment in the House of Lords there is a campaign for misogyny to be added to those to be the 6th protected characteristic under the umbrella of hate crime. But you can see on the slide all the different examples of hate crime: hate mail, verbal abuse, graffiti on the walls, homophobia, slurs, forced marriage, criminal damage, threats, intimidation. Cyberbullying and unsolicited messages can also be included in that if the person is being targeted because they have belong to one or more of those protected characteristics. So students are aware of that, and interestingly, it was more common for boys to be victims of hate crime, but more common for girls to address it. And when we say girls to address it, we mean commenting it or forwarding. Sometimes young people like comments, using the like button. They may dislike the comments. They may make comments saying this is inappropriate, or forward it on to other people to say, look at what this person said, it's inappropriate. In doing so, they often think that they are campaigning for social justice and that they're helping a cause. What they often don't realise is that by liking or disliking or commenting, what they actually do is add it to their own feed. So by disliking it and making the comment, it generates traction and spreads that message or that post rather than blocking it. So our advice to students is always to block anything and report anything that they believe is an example of a hate crime. Over half of 12 to 15-year-olds said that they'd encountered this in the past. Now that means that they may have been a victim of hate crime, or it may be that they've just seen hate crime on their feeds. 20% of them responded by liking, disliking, forwarding or commenting. So 1 in 5 who didn't realise that they were then circulating that message. Only 25% chose to block the person who had shared or made the comments. It's only 1 in 4, and only 22% reported it to the website. So our key takeaway message from this is more young people need to block and more young people need to report, because that means that the messages will stop gaining traction, and it will become clear that those kinds of messages, that kinds of content is unacceptable in society, in our school community, in the global society, in the online community.
Okay, thanks, Miss Browning. So I like this cartoon. We've deliberately shared this cartoon with you because I suspect all of us think we're on the left-hand side of these amazing devices. And shamefully, I can say that these amazing devices that I hold in my hand here, we're never very far from our sides, and we're in control of them. They give us our emails, they give us our information. I'm finding out whether England have or haven't lost a wicket right at the moment, and they're 80 for 2 according to my most recent notification. So really useful. They are my servant. But of course, as this cartoon shows, and I'll bring it back up again so you can see it, as this cartoon shows, in reality, we are the ones who are the servants. Give me Wi-Fi, charge me, read this email, answer this call, check in at the restaurant. And you have to do everything that the phone tells you to do. The notifications come up and you have to respond to them straight away. How many of us as adults hear a ping on our phone and think, oh, I should probably just check that right now? If you don't want, I mean, some people have said, what suggestions do you have to try and help change the behaviours of our children? Well, we need to look at our own behaviours first. And I frequently get told off at the dinner table, if not necessarily during dinner, but whilst we're waiting for dinner or after dinner's happened, I'll get a very stern word from my wife because I'm reading my emails on my phone, or I'm reading the newspaper and seeing what the latest score is or what's going on in the news. And I'm setting a very bad example to my own children. But am I a slave to my phone? I've certainly been accused of it in the past. Whether it's true or not, I really don't know. But this cycle of this vicious circle, really, if you like, is that the more you browse social media, the more lonely, sad or stressed you get, because let's face it, social media is full of really miserable stuff and making yourself feel bad about stuff. But as a consequence, if you're on your own because you spend your time looking at social media rather than going out in the world and being present in the world, then you'll use social media more, which then means you experience the fear of missing out, because other people on social media are having great fun, which is ironic, really, because they show you experiences that is happening from people who are not on social media. They're actually out in the world, but leaves you feeling more isolated. Therefore, you feel more anxious, more concerned, more down, which means you look at more social media, and it becomes a vicious circle. When you add into that the information we looked at earlier about how the dopamine hits come from notifications and from people liking posts that you've put on, then actually it becomes a real problem. So this has got a social issue. All right, what we all forget, and we do forget this, human beings are social animals. We need to talk to each other. We need human interaction. Without it, life is pretty meaningless. And when we go back to that previous slide that shows young people feeling isolated and lonely and a bit down, well, that's because they're lacking human contact, and because they spend so much of their time talking to other people through the medium of the internet, they miss real meaningful interaction. So at the Willink, one of the things is what I said earlier, and I'm going to reiterate it because it's really important. Yes, we don't allow mobile phones in school. As soon as the bell goes for the start of school at 8:40, phones should be put away, and they should not be seen again until 3:05. Now, it is amazing. It is absolutely amazing that as students come into school, I don't suggest you come in and watch it, because standing outside the school watching people coming in, first of all, is a bit weird, and secondly, it's a bit sad, and you probably shouldn't do it. But I do it because it's my job, not any other reason. And we watch young people coming into school, they're all staring at their phones. It's a good job there aren't streetlights everywhere, because I think everyone would have headaches when they arrive at school from walking into street lamps. But everybody's looking at their phones, everybody's staring at them, and as soon as the bell goes at 8:40, 99% of all of the phones get put away, never to be seen again. And then 3:05, when the final bell goes, everybody is up, they're leaving the school, and the one thing they're doing as they leave the school is staring at their phones, as if they've missed something. And yet the irony is they've barely missed anything, because they've been in school all day talking to all their friends, and those same friends will have been posting stuff online, and so they've not really missed a huge amount, but they must check their phones straight away. So the main reason that we don't allow mobile phones in school is simply because we want our students to talk to each other. We want our students to have human interaction. We want our students to be able to sometimes fall out with each other, but it's a lot easier, as Miss Browning will demonstrate a bit later on in a few minutes, much easier to fall out with somebody face to face than it is online, because you can absolutely tell what somebody really thinks. 80% of human communication is through body language, not through what is actually said, and you can't tell body language over the internet on a social media app. It's impossible. Even with emojis, and they're quite helpful, I grant you. So it's really important that our students talk to each other. What we do say is, if you have your phone out, there's every likelihood, in fact it's almost certain, it will get confiscated, and if you get it back at the end of the day, unless it's the second time, in which case it's the end of the week, and if it's the third time, it'll be the end of term, or your parent has to come and get it. One thing that does worry me sometimes is that when that happens, the parents who rush in straight away to collect the mobile phone for their child, I think, come on, maybe a couple of days without a mobile phone would be really good. On those odd occasions when I have banned my son or daughter from using their mobile phone because I think they've been abusing it or overusing it, or actually they've done something else and I really want to do something which will absolutely affect them, we ban them from their mobile phones for a couple of days. You would be astonished how lovely they become almost overnight. So within an hour of not staring at a screen, they actually become lovely adults. Borderline adults are nearly there. They're getting there. So here you go. Here's the world of the world as it used to be, as maybe we would like it to be, on the top, and the world as it sometimes sadly is, of people reading and families sitting around eating extremely healthy dinner there. I mean, I'm not too worried if you have all your fruit and veg like that, but the fact there's no phone, and friends hanging out in the pub having a great time, as opposed to reading your phone at night, which is stopping you going to sleep, families not talking to each other because they're on their mobiles, and friends sitting having an absolutely miserable time in the pub, therefore probably needing their drink more than ever before. But things have changed, and I'm reluctant to say that mobile phones and social media and games are bad, because they're absolutely not. They can be really good, and on the screen now you can see a whole load of good things that are there. Not the one thing that I'm not suggesting for any moment is that you must never use a gaming device, you must never use a mobile phone. That would be ridiculous. Everybody should. And it does help us relax, and it does keep you in contact with your friends, and it does allow you to, you know, it's a hobby for lots of people, gaming, and it's great, and it can be really good fun. Whenever I've played FIFA, particularly with my son, I get beaten heavily. It's still good fun, and we do it together. Social media can be really good. In some ways, social media is the way that perhaps we're going to bring down Putin, if indeed bringing down Putin is the right thing to do, because we are supposed to be politically neutral. But it'll be social media that does that, because state television in Russia is completely controlled by the government. So it can be really useful, social media, but it can also be very dangerous, as we can see. And it does lead to all of these things. I'm going to read them all because, and here I am highlighting the negative things. It's important to have them in our minds. Poor academic achievement, obesity, reduced attentiveness, social isolation, disrupted sleep pattern. I think that's really important. Trolling, in-game purchases. I know that's really important as well. Disrupts mood and relaxation, low self-esteem, negative body image, fear of missing out, loneliness and isolation, cyberbullying, grooming, harmful content, disrupted sleep. That comes in twice. And harmful content, so important they named it twice. These are the things we are having to contend with, but they're not all bad. Miss Browning.
I'm laughing slightly because I know that we didn't read all of the positives, but we did read all of the negatives. So I think our neutrality is perhaps swayed slightly. And perhaps one of the reasons that we are maybe slightly more biased about the dangers and the threats of social media and gaming is because often we have conversations with young people about the negative aspects. So, Mr. Sizer, you did mention one of the positive aspects about young people becoming empowered and joining political campaigns or contributing towards community groups, and that is absolutely true, and we see that with our young people, that they are more socially active and politically minded and want to make a difference to society by and large. But one of the other things that we also need to be mindful of is some of the personal ways in which young people can be negatively affected. So our key message to young people is, when they are using social media, irrespective of what platform it is, before they post, before they say it, they have the benefit of time. We talked about non-verbal communication and social skills being very important in the real world. One of the benefits of online communication is that we can think before we speak, and we can think about the wording that we use, the purpose of our communication, and how it's going to be received by other people, because we also know that sometimes we don't intend to offend somebody and it just happens naturally, and some of us are able to offend people more naturally than others. So we use this acronym, THINK. Is it, first of all, before we post, is the information that we're sharing true? Often it's not. Often it's third-hand information, and therefore we don't know whether it's true. But the minute it's posted, it's received by others as a fact. Is the message that we're going to send really helpful or unhelpful? Is it inspiring? Now that's a grand question, isn't it? Inspiring. I'm not sure that many of my messages will be inspiring, but I would like to think that what I do share with some people will be positive and enhance their day in some way. Is it necessary, particularly if it's a post or a comment in response to a post? We can receive posts and consume that information and learn from it without having to comment. We can have our own views in our minds and talk about it in the real world later, but we don't need to post a comment. And finally, crucially, is it kind? One of the things that we would want from all of our students at the Willink is that they are kind to themselves, to the environment, to their families, most importantly to others around them. So crucially, is it kind? So we always ask them to think, and we would ask you to do the same. What we would also ask students to do is, the minute that they get something which is not kind, that they block and report, or report and block. All social media apps and gaming apps have a report function where they can, and it's very, very simple. Usually in the top right hand corner, there's a settings bubble or 3 dots, and you can see options here. One is from Snapchat, one is from Instagram, and they can immediately block and report content. The timescales for Instagram has recently been updated, so now if there is unsuitable comment, something which is offensive, something which is hateful, something which is a hate crime, something which is sexually inappropriate, when that's reported, it's actually now the site is blocked almost instantly, whereas in the past it could take days, weeks, and sometimes it wasn't removed. But blocking is immediate. So if somebody's receiving phone calls, messages from anybody who they don't want to receive contact from, then they can be blocked. And as we said earlier, they can be unblocked. It doesn't need to be the end of a friendship, but it can be the end of a temporary conflict. It might be something's blown up at 7 o'clock on a Wednesday night. They can be blocked for that period of time until there's been an opportunity to resolve and restore the conflict. And that's something that we encourage students to do in school. We ask students to report issues through our report and restore. On the screen, you can see our school RM Unify homepage. So when students log into their school email, there's a tab there which says report and restore, and they can use that form to share details about an incident that's happened, whether it's in the real world or online, the details of the people who was there, what happened, and then give us an opportunity to support them in restoring that. And we do that through the process of restorative practice, where we have key questions with key outcomes for young people. But actually the most important thing is empowering them and recognising that conflict doesn't need to be long term. We can recover from it, because that's part of growing up. There will always be times where we have disagreements. Oh, and Mr. Sizer talks about the importance of body language, facial expression, tone of voice, that 80% of communication being non-verbal, and that miscommunication, misinterpretations are often what leads to conflict. It doesn't necessarily need to be bullying, but it can be conflict. And that's because the written word can be interpreted by different people in different ways at different times. On the screen, there's a sentence, "I didn't say she stole my money," but you could interpret that in different ways by stressing different words. So for example, I didn't say she stole my money. I didn't say she stole my money, the implication being she said I did say it. I didn't say she stole my money. Okay, I didn't say it, but I thought it. I didn't say she stole my money. Oh, she maybe didn't steal it, but other people did. I didn't say she stole my money, the implication being she took it but didn't steal it. I didn't say she stole my money, but she maybe stole somebody else's. And I didn't say she stole my money, but she maybe stole something else. So those 7 words on the screen, the same sentence, but interpreted or delivered in very, very different ways. And we see that that's very common with online communication. So again, that's when we would ask students to think before they respond to it in a reactive way and ask a question in person rather than responding online. So the next question that you might have is, well, if we know all of this about the dangers and the pitfalls of social media and gaming and the impact it has on mental health, what do we do at the Willink School to support and promote that? One of the things is our curriculum, our extracurriculum and our tutor programme, our pastoral system. On the screen there's an example of our business computing and media curriculum, which runs from year 7 through to year 9. And in that curriculum, students focus on how to communicate, how communication devices are used, how to use digital skills for life, how to collaborate with others online using things like Teams, and how to do that respectfully. So the first topic in year 7 is e-safety. And then, because we have a spiral curriculum, we return to those topics throughout year 8 and throughout year 9. So if you think about in term 4 in year 8, where they focus on mobile app development, or in term 5, where they learn about trolling and media consumption, being able to know what's a sponsored advert and what's news information, and that continues into year 9, where that all comes together. We focus again on trolling, marketing, and the online digital world. In addition to the BCM, the Business Computing and Media curriculum, we also have our PSHE curriculum, and we're really lucky at the Willink School to have a dedicated team of staff who are trained to deliver personal social health education. Unlike many other schools who deliver that through tutor programme, we have within our timetable from year 7 dedicated time for students to cover those key topics, 5 key topics: health and wellbeing, living in the wider world, relationships, work-related learning and disability in year 7, for example. But you can see in term 2, in living in the wider world, we cover relationships, and that is online and in the real world. What is a good friend and what is not? Conflict resolution. Okay, so we may have disagreements, but how do we overcome that, and how do we do that in a diplomatic way without causing harm to anybody else or to ourselves, and maintaining boundaries? Friendships and anti-bullying, as we said, which includes the online world. So we've got a core curriculum which focuses on those skills, but crucially, our values underpin this. We want all of our students to have an enriching, fulfilling time during their Willink era, and that is that we want them to engage, respect and achieve. And we do that through those 5 pillars of Willink wellbeing: that they should be active, that they should give to others, that they should be constantly learning because it's good for their wellbeing, that they should be mindful and take notice and appreciate the world around them, the people around them, that they should connect to others, and that includes the online world, but most definitely the real world. And actually, we do think our students do that very well. 90% of our students are physically active for greater than 45 minutes every day. 91% of our students, when they were last surveyed, said that they felt connected to others in the real world, and 69% attend extracurricular clubs and activities. So we know that through promoting time and opportunities to do that, the more time they're doing that, the less time they're online and developing the key social skills that we want them to have to be successful, healthy, and to have a fulfilling life in the world of work beyond the Wellington School. And there's an example of some of those extracurricular activities that are available. These are the after school activities shared with students through the tutor programme on the school website and updated each term, because we do have different activities in the spring and summer to autumn and winter.
Okay, thank you, Miss Browning. Right, so we have had a few questions, and actually the theme of every single question that I've read, well, that's not entirely true, some of which we've replied to privately, but the theme pretty much of most of the questions is, yeah, that's all fine, right, we know all that, but what can you suggest for how we go about changing some of these behaviours? Okay, well, I can't promise we're definitely going to be able to fix it, because if we had a magic wand, or there was a magic wand, I guess it would have been fixed by now. But I think we're all in this position that actually over the last 2 years, and there's the quote, right, as a result of my child being at home more than usual, I've had to relax some of the rules about what my child does online. Hands up, I've done that without question. So it's what we're going to do about that. What do we change about that? Well, the first thing, we wouldn't actually expect a young person to cross the road without teaching them how to cross the road so they don't get knocked over. The Green Cross Code Man, I don't know if he still exists, to be fair, but he was very important in my youth. And we don't expect young people to go out at the other end of our spectrum in school. We don't expect them to go out on the roads driving without having passed tests in order to prove that they're safe to drive. So why would we let young people go out and use the internet and game and use social media without actually having some sense of what the risks are and what's safe? So first thing you need to do, and there is no alternative to this, you need to start the conversation. And regular conversations about what you're looking at, what are you doing, what is this, what website you're looking at, what are you posting on Instagram. My recommendation is not to do that in a accusatory way, not to do that in a critical way. Your son or daughter almost certainly will think it's accusatory, and they'll think it's critical, and they'll think you're trying to have a go at them. I can say that confidently from personal experience, that they won't trust you necessarily, but you need to keep on at it and have regular conversations about it so that it's ordinary, as the suggestions say on the phone, on the screen, ironically on the screen. It should be as ordinary as talking about the weather, talking about the dog, something you've watched on TV. When do you do this? When the best time to talk to any teenager, in my experience, is in the car, when there's two of you facing away from each other, in the sense you're both facing the same way, but you're not still looking at each other. You can't necessarily read the body language quite so well, and you speak about what you're looking at, what you're doing. Thirdly, lead by example. Okay, so talk about what you're looking at as well. Talk about what you've been reading. The crucial thing is the internet is not a really, really bad thing. The internet is a really good thing. It's improved the lives of people considerably. It's improved our lives considerably, but it's nothing wrong with talking about how positive the internet can be. And we are role models. All of us are role models. As teachers, we're role models. As parents, it's even more important that you're role models. So show them how to use it. Talk to them about their homework. Use class charts to look at homework and see what they've got. I would suggest that if you are if you do allow your son or daughter to play video games, well then maybe you do it in front. They do it in front of you. You have it in the living room rather than in the bedroom where they can secretly do whatever they want. Play games with them. So if they're playing video games, see if you can join in. I know that sounds almost ridiculous, and it depends, I guess, to a certain extent where you are on the spectrum of, have I got an 11-year-old in year 7? Am I, are you, I've got a big gruff 16-year-old who's been doing this for 7 years already? Then I guess it's much harder to do it at that point. But actually join in with them, talk to them about it, watch it for a bit. What you don't want is that the video game is a thing that you come along at tea time and they won't come off it and you moan at them about the video game. That's a really bad cycle to be in. And I say that as somebody who's been in that cycle and sometimes is. I return to that cycle on a fairly regular basis, but it's good to try and avoid that. Don't treat it as something that is bad and negative and critical. In fact, I guess if you want to stop your son or daughter playing video games, is play them as well, because that will almost certainly stop them playing them. I believe that's how it works. Okay, something else you could do is about, if you think it's out of control, if you think that your sons or your daughters are playing too much, then come up with a family agreement. What they will access, okay, when they'll access it, how much time they'll spend on it, set timers on devices, okay, but actually it's better if your son or daughter control it and control themselves and stop doing it. Set up parental controls, all right, make sure that that's set up. Make sure that your son or daughter have got privacy settings on their phones, and you need to check that. Make sure that they haven't got credit cards stored on gaming devices or phones or whatever, so they can't make easy in-app purchases. These are all important decisions to make, and you can make them together. All right, and you come up with an agreement.
I think that's the crucial point, isn't it? That it's about what can we do together, because there may be things about social media gaming that your children can contribute that we hadn't thought about. So there are some really good examples of family agreement templates that you can download online. One example is from Every Child Matters or Child Net Matters, and that clarifies what have we agreed, we've had a discussion, what have we all agreed to do, and who's going to do it. And that includes what are the parents going to do, parents and carers going to do, and what are the children within the house going to do. That just does result in reduced conflict, because when somebody's not sticking to their end of the bargain, you can go back to the family agreement, which might be pinned on the fridge, and say, look, Mum, you said you weren't going to post our family photographs on Facebook, and now my friends have all seen our family photographs on Facebook. You said in our agreement that we weren't going to do that. But equally, you can go to your child to say, this is not private, we've been able to access your account. So do look at some helpful examples of family agreements. The crucial thing is that they know that they can talk to you if they've got a problem, that you're not going to judge them, that you're not going to overreact. And as Mr. Sizer said, if you've started the conversation very early, they're more likely to have a conversation with you and tell you what they've come across. The next one is about privacy and personal information. We have said that we need to be role models as adults to make sure that our own settings are private, that only people who we know and trust can see our updates, can see our photographs, can see our information, and young people need to be able to do that. Every single app that we install has privacy notifications, so we do need to make sure that if for young people their names are not visible, their school address is not visible, if there are photographs that they're not wearing their uniform, and that they can also disable the Geo app, which we'll talk about in a little bit.
One thing I'll add to that, on the fourth bullet point down, where it talks about privacy is possible, well, I'm going to say it's not actually, because even if you've got settings to just those people that you know, once you post something up online, those people have access to it, those people can see it, and therefore you don't have control over it anymore. This is something that young people find much harder. And actually, I would say the vast majority of online problems that we have to respond to in school is that somebody has shared something with somebody. So one young person has shared something with a friend of theirs, and then there's been a falling out, and that person has then, or even if there hasn't been a falling out, but that person has then shared that with somebody else, and so there's a break of, there's been a breach of respect and privacy between the two of them, which really upsets people. And actually, I'm not talking necessarily about something illegal or sexting or anything like that, which we'll talk about in just a moment, but just about anything. Oh, so and so fancies somebody, so and so's had an argument with their mum, so and so wants to do this for their birthday, but they did something else instead, and that gets shared with somebody else, or someone else gets told about that. That happens very, very frequently, and therefore it's about young people not necessarily knowing who they can trust. So they should always be really careful about what they post online. We give that message all the time. In fact, when this has happened, I've spoken to young people and they always say, oh yeah, I know I shouldn't post it online, but they still do. So actually you can play a very important role in talking about that all the time. Gaming, we've talked about quite a lot. Checking the ratings, who are they talking to, making sure that card details haven't been stored. Remind them that others can hear conversations in your home if they wear headsets, etc. and so on. Miss Browning just a moment ago suggested that everybody needs to make sure that every app has its is geotagged, and you can not allow it if you don't want people to know where you are and where you live and where your movements are. A few years ago, I got burgled in my house. My garage was broken into, and had two bikes, and they were both stolen. And the police told me the reason that happened is because on Strava, which is an app used to plot activities on, it plots a map on it, and the thieves were able to see where I lived because I had posted it up online, and I didn't have the privacy settings, which blocked like in a 500-meter radius around where your house is. So I've changed that since, and they said they'd seen quite a lot of it. So, Miss Browning.
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier that in school we educate students through our curriculum, our extracurricular programme, our enrichment programme. One of the other things that we do is work very closely with our colleagues with Thames Valley Police, and in particular with PC Tim Emery, who is the safeguarding police officer for West Berkshire. He has delivered online assemblies during lockdown, in-person assemblies pre-lockdown, and also delivers activities during House Week or Activity Week or information to sixth formers. One of the topics that he often talks to students about is sexting, and that conversation starts early. The reason it starts early is because the Thames Valley Police or any other police body does not want to criminalise students. What they do want is to educate and prevent issues. So the kinds of things that the messages that PC Tim Emery and his colleagues will share with students through the assembly programme, the tutor programme, the PSHE programme, is reference to sharing these nude images, and the fact that once it has been sent, it can never be undone. But he is sympathetic to the reasons that people may find themselves sending images, and they include feeling or hearing that everybody else is doing it. That sense that everybody's doing it isn't true, but it isn't perhaps a message that they hear or that they feel. So that creates peer pressure for them to do it. Being worried that they're going to be called frigid or boring, even if it's something that they feel uncomfortable about doing. Feeling that by sending messages is a way to prove their sexuality, and that doesn't need to be somebody who's questioning their sexuality, but perhaps feels that they need to prove it to others within their cohort or their peer group. It is possible that people feel more than pressured, but they feel threatened or harassed or even blackmailed into sending pictures, where somebody may have a bit of information that they're using to manipulate and coerce others to send information. And that can be as simple as, if you don't do this, I'm going to tell your friends that, or if you don't do this, I'm going to tell your mum that. It may be that they're just trying to people please and it's easier to give in. It may be that they have been feeling socially isolated, and that this is a way to gain the trust and the support from another group that they want to ingratiate themselves with, which is a horrible situation to be in, but it is common. It may be that they send them because they want to send them because they believe that they are in a trusting relationship, or that they've been unable to see their partner, or and particularly during lockdown. But the danger is that they may trust them at the time. Those relationships can end, and that's a message that we do share loudly with students.
Okay, so here's the first question for you. Jordan and Alex, I'll let you think about this yourself. Jordan and Alex are in year 10. They're in a steady relationship. Jordan is nervous but takes a naked selfie and sends it to Alex. The question is, has Jordan actually broken the law? I'm going to give you just a moment to think about that, and the answer is yes, of course Jordan has broken the law, because he or she has sent this picture to Alex. So phones and computers are often involved in forms of criminality and are often confiscated by the police. It would be wrong to say that we haven't had experience of that. We absolutely have. One thing that's absolutely true is that the police often end up keeping hold of phones then for ages and ages and ages, And as the police have said here before, this is what they told us. They said, oh, by the time you get it back, it's out of date, and you might as well buy a new one anyway. So the next,
and I think the PSHE Emery shares that with students and tells them that one of the cases that he's aware of, it took 7 years for the young person to get their phone returned, by which point they were probably driving, married, and had moved house.
Okay, the next one. So this is still Jordan and Alex. Jordan then asks Alex to send a nude back. Alex is a little nervous, but does agree and sends similar pictures back to Jordan. The pictures are sent from a laptop that belongs to Alex's father, but is mostly used by Alex. Alex deletes the pictures after sending them. Has Alex committed a crime? Yes, absolutely, without question, because Alex has sent these pictures. Here's another interesting point, though. Has Alex's dad committed a crime? Well, it's yes and no. So if Alex's dad knew what he was doing on the laptop, then he has helped to commit a crime because he's allowed this to happen. If he didn't, then probably not. But what would happen, and the police have told us this, is Alex's dad would, without question, be interviewed by the police formally and asked to go down to the station, or the police would go around the house and have a conversation, and that can be quite embarrassing and quite difficult. So you do need to be aware of what goes on. Certainly when we're in school, we say if it's your property, it's your phone, you're responsible for what happens on it. If it's your account on the school website, it is your responsibility. If so, you know, we have young people who say, oh yeah, it wasn't me, I didn't do that, someone has got my password. Well, actually, it's your job to keep your password safe and secure, and if you don't do that, then you are responsible for that happening. Next one. Alex shows the pictures of Jordan to a friend, Sam, and sends Sam one picture. The question is, has Alex committed a crime? Quite clearly that he has committed a crime. And what about Sam? Has Sam committed a crime? Well, it depends. If Sam has asked for these photographs, then definitely he or she have committed a crime. If Sam then keeps that photograph and doesn't delete it from his or her phone, then he or she have definitely committed a crime. If he or she didn't ask and they didn't keep it on their phone, then the likelihood is they haven't committed a crime, but the police would definitely, without question, investigate that. And that's when the phone gets taken away for a considerable length of time. Finally, Jordan and Alex end their relationship, which sadly it's not a romantic novel school, and most relationships tend to end. Jordan asks Alex for more photos and states if Alex doesn't send some more, Jordan will show friends the original images. Alex refuses and Jordan sends 2 images to 3 friends. We have known cases where this has happened. Is Jordan in a lot of trouble with the police now? I hope you're all jumping up and down and saying, absolutely. Jordan would find him or herself in an awful lot of trouble in that circumstance. So, Chris, one of Jordan's friends, shares one of the images on Snapchat. Could Chris face arrest? The answer is quite clearly yes. So, things to consider. These are the laws. We're not going to go into these very much, but if you possess an indecent photograph, sometimes the police call it a pseudo photograph of a child, that's anybody under the age of 18, you are breaking the law and you could end up in prison for 5 years. Now, I've not known any young person that's happened to, but it could happen, and they could at least get a community order or a record on their, get a police record, which wouldn't be good. If you showed or distributed such a photo, as we've seen from some of the circumstances here that both Jordan and Sam did that, yes, you get an awful lot of trouble, much more trouble, and the maximum penalty there could be 10 years. Again, I've not known that, but I do know the police have investigated young people that this has happened to. So it's something that really needs to be taken seriously. We cover all of this in PSHE lessons, so there shouldn't be anybody after probably the end of year 8 who won't know all of this. And the interesting question is, when's the age of criminal responsibility in the UK? It's actually 10, although it's 8 in Scotland. In other countries in the EU, we're not in the EU anymore, in other countries, such as countries in the EU, it's a bit older than that, it's about 12, but 10 years old, so that's everybody at the Willink. Everybody at the Willink is criminally responsible. Furthermore, even if you haven't broken the law, and you have, with consent over the age of 18, sent nude pictures, it's pretty risky because you have no idea what someone else is going to do with it. It goes all the way back to the picture that we had before, you know, the message we had before, which was if you post something up online at all, you lose control of it straight away. You've got no control over what someone else does with it, even if you've got your privacy settings set. And young people absolutely need to understand that. And it's something that we drill into them on a regular basis. And obviously parents need to do that too. Sexting. We do know, okay, that there's a lot of sexting about. Okay, an awful lot of sexting, and the age has come down. So we know, for instance, that in the good old days, and I say them 5, 6, 7 or 8 years ago, this was something that was an issue probably from about the age of 14 upwards. Now I know that where this is happening in primary schools. We've heard stories of this happening in primary schools, and it is quite rife. You would be surprised at just how many young people will have what would be considered inappropriate pictures on their phones because somebody has shared it with them, not that they've taken it themselves, but somebody has shared these pictures with them, and there's quite a lot of them about. So that is worth having a conversation with your son or daughter about. But the clear message about this is pause before you post. All right, if you're about to post something online, I know that Tim Emery, the safeguarding officer, used to say, if you wouldn't want your granny to see it, don't put it online. And maybe that's really good advice. But if you think you wouldn't want somebody to see something you post online, don't post it because you guarantee they can see it. I sometimes have conversations with young people who say, oh, it wasn't for you, it was private. And I say, yeah, I don't like to worry you, but I haven't seen it, we don't look at it, but I know about it and we're having this conversation. Is that really what you wanted? And of course the answer to that is always no. So final 3 points to remember about sexting. It is illegal. Sending, receiving or being in possession of is absolutely illegal. You've got no control over it, and that's not just about sexting, that's about all things that are posted online. Absolutely all things that are posted online. And finally, if you post things online, you're much more vulnerable to bullying, you're much more vulnerable to harm, and you are much more vulnerable to blackmail. Here are some websites you can access. CEOPS is really good. ChildNet we've talked about, Childline, NSPCC's got an absolute raft of information in it, which is really, really good. And Internet Matters. If you've got any questions, you should contact us at the school. If you've got any questions about the PSHE curriculum, any questions about what we do in tutor time, if you're worried about what your son or daughter is doing online, please contact us at the school. We can give advice. If it's outside of school, it's tricky and it's potentially quite difficult to manage, but we will always intervene because it's an educational purpose, and our job here really is to educate people, not to necessarily tell people off, although we're quite happy to do that from time to time. So we've been much longer than we were anticipating, certainly a good 20 minutes more than we were anticipating to go. So from me, it is good evening. From Miss Browning,
it's
I'll let her say good evening as well.
Good night. Thank you for joining us.
It is we're just like the two Ronnies. So thank you very, very much. And if you've got any questions, please let us know. Thank you. Bye-bye.